Yes. Okay, so hopefully you're pretty used to seeing my rendition of the brainstem by now. If I have to go through and talk about, so here's going to be my midbrain, right? Here's going to be my pons, here's my medulla, and in the back here is my cerebellum. Okay? And just to make it, which way does it got to go? This way. Is that worse or better? Okay, just to make it easy to see left from right, I'm going to go ahead and put my midline right down the middle. Okay. And this is a nice landmark, thinking about the midbrain, the part of the ventricular system that resides in the midbrain. Does anybody remember what that is? That is cerebral aqueduct. Awesome. All right. When thinking about the cranial nerves, there are 12 total. Okay. There are 4 above the pons. So they're going to be 4 from here up. They're going to be 4 in the pons, and then they're going to be 4 below the pons. Okay. So if you know where the cranial nerve is, and you're seeing a problem with that cranial nerve, you can predict where the problem is in the brainstem by just knowing that simple piece of information. 4 above, 4 in the pons, and 4 below the pons. Start out with cranial nerve number 1. Does anybody know the first cranial nerve? Olfactory. Awesome. So I'm going to start with, so this is going to be one of the first one. Well, the first one is going to be above the pons, and it actually starts out, here's my rendition of a nose. Well, thank you. And this is going to be your first cranial nerve. Cranial nerves are usually indicated by Roman numerals, and this is olfactory. That's the olfactory nerve. I wonder if I turn this. There. That's better. Okay, for the purpose of these cranial nerve drawings, I'm going to go ahead and indicate the cranial nerve in this yellow color. And the olfactory nerve are just really short little nerves that they reside in the nasal cavity, and they just live right here. Okay, so that's your first cranial nerve. Okay, second cranial nerve. Anybody know the second cranial nerve? Optic, awesome. So here's going to be my rendition of an eyeball. And we will cover all about the structure and function of everything in the eye when we get to the visual portion of the course. But for the most part, the second cranial nerve comes from the retina of the eye, or neurons in the retina of the eye, and it projects backward through the hole in the back of the eyeball. And then this is your second cranial nerve here, okay, as it exits the back of the eyeball, and it's the optic, O-P-T-I-C nerve. Okay, pretty easy so far, right? First two, olfactory and optic. Now we come down to the third cranial nerve, and if you remember, we used the third cranial nerve as a landmark previously.
Ocular motor.
That is your ocular motor. Here is your third, and I'll go ahead and draw these bilaterally, okay? So coming from more the top of the midbrain, here is your third cranial nerve. Make that yellow. Here, cranial nerve number 3 is oculomotor. Okay, fourth cranial nerve?
Trochlear.
Cochlear. Are you cheating, or you know this? you're on the ball. Okay, so this is going to be the last of the cranial nerves that lives above the pons. The fourth cranial nerve is the trochlear nerve, and it's also the only cranial nerve that exits the brainstem dorsally. Okay, everything else is going to be exiting the brainstem ventrally. So with the fourth cranial nerve, what you see is coming down here. So they're actually in order, 1, 2, and there's number 3. Number 4 coming off here is going to come out the back, so it's coming out the dorsal end of the brainstem and then coming around to the front. Okay, so that's just my way of saying came out the back and eventually makes its way out to the front. Bilateral. Okay, and thinking about the position, this is your fourth cranial nerve. Trochlear. So there you have, those are the 4 cranial nerves that live above the pons. You have olfactory, optic, oculomotor, and trochlear. Okay, so the 4 above the pons. Moving down. And notice they're going to be in order. So number 3 is here, number 4 is next, number 5 is actually the first one that we're going to see in the pons. The 5th cranial nerve is trigeminal. Yes, it's a great big old nerve. This is one of the ones that when we pulled the brains, you could see it comes out here laterally on the pons. Okay. Trigeminal. Fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal. Okay, that's the 5th cranial nerve is the first cranial nerve that we see in the pons. There are 3 more in the pons. And interestingly enough, the 5th cranial nerve comes out here laterally on the pons. The others come out. They start medially and then go in. So you have 3, 4, 5. Number 6, you move most medially at about the area of the pontomedullary junction, still in the pons. You have cranial nerve number 6 here coming out bilaterally. Okay, cranial nerve number 6, Geo? Deucens.
I don't know 7. I'm just saying.
You don't know 7?
I only had to teach up to 6, so I knew up to 6.
Oh, you had to teach
I know like 10, 11, but that's it. So, yeah, exactly. Gotta be honest.
Okay. The 6th cranial nerve here is going to be abducens, A-B-D-U-C-E-N-S. And again, 5 lateral, and then 6, just next one in line, but come medial. Okay. Cranial nerve 6 is B1. Okay, a new cranial nerve for Geo is cranial nerve number 7. It's you know facial? It's facial, yes, it is facial nerve. And cranial nerve number 7 is going to be just lateral to cranial nerve number 6. So you have 5 and you come medial, 6, and then there's 7 right here, and this is your facial nerve. And that's 7. And cranial nerve number 8 is just lateral to cranial nerve number 7. Vestibulocochlear, yes.
Did I miss a class?
Was that one you slept through a while back? You asked. Okay, cranial nerve number 8 is vestibulocochlear. Put that way over here. stabilocochleal. Okay, and those are the cranial nerves in the pons. So 5 trigeminal, 6 abducens, 7 facial, 8 stabilocochlear. Okay, 4 above the pons. Those are the 4 in the pons. And then there's going to be 4 below the pons. Okay, the first one that we're going to talk about that is in the medulla. Okay, it originates in the medulla. It's cranial nerve number 9. Cranial nerve number 9 sits right here. And that's, does anybody know cranial nerve 9? Glossopharyngeal. Good, yeah. So cranial nerve number 9 is glossopharyngeal. Is an X, so Gloss. So bless you. Pharyngeal. Okay, cranial nerve number 9, first one you see coming out of the medulla is your glossopharyngeal. Okay, and then cranial nerve number 10, that's a big one. Vagus, yes, cranial nerve number 10. So notice we're here. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Go down one more, and that's where cranial nerve number 10 lives, right here. This is your vagus nerve. It's the wanderer. And cranial nerve number 11 has some unusual characteristics, since it's the only cranial nerve that arises out of the spinal cord. Okay, it actually arises from neurons in the ventral gray horn of C1 through C5. Okay, so to indicate the 11th cranial nerve, so here's 10 vagus, number 11, I'm going to have axons coming out of the ventral gray horns, 3, 4, 5, of C1 through C5. Okay, so it actually starts here in the cervical spinal cord. Okay, and then what's going to happen is these axons combine to form cranial nerve number 11, and cranial nerve number 11 is actually positioned right here underneath the vagus. Okay, so if I had to draw it, something like that. Okay, but the origin of cranial nerve number 11 is not in the brainstem proper, but in three-dimensional space, it's kind of close to vagus. That's why I got the number 11. Okay. Okay, the cranial nerve number 11, yeah, is your spinal accessory. So that's X1, and that's your spinal accessory nerve. Okay, so it works out really nice. You can just count down. There's 3, 4, 5, and then come medial 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then the last one is cranial nerve number 12. And we talked before about these little bumps. The middlemost bump is your, so there's 2 bumps, yeah. So the middlemost is your pyramid, the outermost is your olive, okay? That makes this little line here, it has a special name, it's called your pre-olivary sulcus. Pre-olivary sulcus, okay? And cranial nerve number 12 arises from your pre-olivary sulcus bilaterally. So it just comes out here. So cranial nerve number 11 comes out of the cervical vertebra, ventral great horn. But cranial nerve number 12 arises directly from the medulla in the area of the pre-olivary sulcus. And cranial nerve number 12 is, anybody know? Hypoglossal, right. Hypoglossal. Okay. Hopefully that's clear. There we have it. Now those are the approximate positions of all the cranial nerves we're going to talk about. There are 4 above the pons. This olfactory arises from nasal cavity, and the optic arises out of the back of the eyeball. And then 2 in the midbrain proper. That's cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor, cranial nerve number 4, trochlear. And then there's 4 in the pons, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So trigeminal, abducens, facial, and oculomotor. And then 4 below the pons. Okay. Glossopharyngeal, number 9, vagus, 10, spinal accessory, and hypoglossal, 12. Questions? Pretty clear to see them? All right, let's move on. The next one is, what I'd like to do is take each of these cranial nerves and talk about them individually with regard to their function. It turns out there's cranial nerves that have only sensory function. There's cranial nerves that have only motor function. And then there are 4 cranial nerves that have a mixed motor and sensory function. Okay, and those are the tough ones to remember. Okay, but to start out, let's start out with the easiest, and I think the sensory cranial nerves, or those cranial nerves that only have sensory function, are a good starting point. And those are cranial nerves number 1, number 2, and number 8. Okay, let's start with cranial nerve number 1. If you remember, cranial nerve number 1 is going to come out of the nose. Right, and there it is. And cranial nerve number 1, the name of that cranial nerve is olfactory. So what you see here is there's going to be a Roman numeral. We'll write the name of the cranial nerve. O stands for origin, or where it arises, and then F stands for function. Okay, so now we're going to think about what these things do. The origin of cranial nerve number 1, olfactory, is going to be your nasal cavity. Okay, and as we go through, we're going to be talking about lots of different functions, and I'm going to try and keep the colors very consistent. Okay? When I'm talking about sensory cranial nerves, I'm going to use general sensory. I'm going to use a blue color for sensory cranial nerves. Okay? The function of the olfactory is, anybody know? Smell. Yeah, or olfaction. We'll just say smell. Blue for general sensory. And cranial nerve number 2. We talked about cranial nerve number 2, and it comes out of the back of the eyeball. It's actually formed from the cells that make up the retina here. And cranial nerve number 2. Anybody remember the name? Optic. Optic cranial nerve. And just to keep it simple, we're going to say that originates in the eyeball. Anybody know what cranial nerve number 2 is function? Vision. Okay, so you're not holding up. No, you just have your hand. Okay, that's fine. That's good. Okay, so these 2 are above the brainstem. Okay, now we're going to consider, and just to make it easy, I'm only going to draw it on one side. Otherwise it'll get crowded. Next we're on down here to cranial nerve number 8. Does anybody remember where cranial nerve number 8 comes in? Is it midbrain, pons, or medulla? It's the pons. It's one of those ones in the pons. And this is going to be your vestibulocochlear. Okay, and as far as its position in the brainstem, we showed this just a minute ago. It's going to be here, just above the level of the pontomedullary junction. It's going to be very lateral. Okay, so there's your cranial nerve number 8. And as I said, the origin is going to be lateral pons. Okay, as far as a function is concerned, there's going to be, does anybody know the function of the vestibulocochlear?
Head position?
Through what? What does it innervate?
The cilia in your ear, in your cochlea.
Oh, hearing. Okay, so it's involved in hearing, and that's the cochlear portion of the vestibulocochlear nerve. So it actually innervates two things. It innervates the cochlea, which is involved in hearing. So let's write that down. So cochlea, which is involved in hearing. I switched over to a little bit darker blue color. Is that because the other one isn't good? Let's see if I can.
Is it still sensory?
Yeah, it's sensory, but I don't have a fine tip blue. Let's see if I can do this. I don't want to get it confusing. Okay, so there's cochlea, it's involved in hearing. And one more thing, the vestibular system in your inner ear, okay, and that's going to be involved in your balance, or we'll talk a whole day on the vestibular system, but if you want to associate your vestibular system with balance, that's a good thing. So the function is to innervate the cochlea as well as vestibular system. And that's involved in balance. Lots of parts there. Pretty legible. Okay, pretty straightforward. Just 3 cranial nerves with purely sensory function. That's cranial nerve number 1, olfactory, cranial nerve number 2, optic, and cranial nerve number 8, vestibulocochlear. Okay, questions about purely sensory? Yes?
Are these where those pseudo-unipolar neurons are from? Because I know that in that much.
The pseudo-unipolar neurons were only in the dorsal root ganglia. Remember when we talked about vision and olfaction way back when? Those were a different kind of sensory. They were the bipolar. Remember the bipolar ones? Yeah, those are the ones involved in vision and olfaction, or smell, are your bipolar neurons. Okay, now let's move on. That's sensory. Let's move on to motor. That's really slow. Okay, so when we have the motor, because we're going to talk about 5 of them, the first one's going to be cranial nerve number 3. I'm just going to flesh this out a little bit for you because I think my Roman numerals got a little squashed. Cranial nerve number 3. This is cranial nerve number 6 here. Okay. Right below that's going to be cranial nerve number, should be 9. No, 11 is motor. And then 12 is also motor. So we have 3, 4, 6, 11, and 12 have solely motor function. Okay, nothing else but motor here happening with these cranial nerves. And you know, for the motor function, I'm going to use red as my color. And since I'm drawing so many in, I'm going to put a midline here so it doesn't get confusing. Okay, this is nothing more than separating left and right halves. So for cranial nerve number 3, that was my oculomotor. Okay. And if you remember, the oculomotor cranial nerve lived here high up in the midbrain. I'm just going to draw it on one side. That's my cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor. Right here. So the origin is going to be the midbrain. Okay, and it's a specific place in the midbrain. So to indicate that it's kind of high up in the midbrain, I'm going to say it's found at the level of the superior colliculus. And the superior colliculus, way back when, I think it was the first day of class, it's a little bump on the back of the midbrain. There's two of them. There's inferior and superior. We're going to look at the inferior in a minute. But this is the superior colliculus. And that means nothing more than one of the two little bumps on the back. You should know that oculomotor is at the same level as the superior, or the highermost of the two colliculi. Okay. And in indicating function, for motor, I'm going to use red. Red for, we talked about voluntary movement before, and that was motor. Does anybody remember what else we use as far as output for the CN or the PNS? There was motor function, there was voluntary motor function, and then there was autonomic function. Remember that? We'll get there. All right, let's look at red. And to indicate the autonomic function, I'm just going to use a green color. So as far as motor function is concerned, so for here I'll just put motor in red. And cranial nerve number 3, does anybody know what the motor function of cranial nerve number 3 is? Yeah, so it's going to innervate the majority, and we'll talk about that in a minute, of the extraocular eye muscles. Okay, I say majority, and we'll talk about which specific ones here in a minute. But cranial nerve number 3 does most of your extraocular eye muscles except for 2. Okay. It also has motor activity. It innervates something known as levator palpebrae. Does anybody know what levator palpebrae innervates? Or what it does? No, that's the autonomic function. We'll get to that one in a minute. Closer, it's like in the eye area, but it's going to be your eyelid opening. Okay, things that raise your eyelid. Okay.
How do you spell the second?
Palpebrae. Levator, open up, palpebrae. Eyelid. Okay, those are the motor, the voluntary motor activities that happen that are innervated by ocular motor cranial nerve. The other, I'm going to indicate in a green color. Okay, the green is going to indicate autonomic function, and cranial nerve number 3 is involved in 2 different autonomic functions. It's going to be something known as lens accommodation. We'll talk about what that is when we get to the vision portion, but lens accommodation. And lens accommodation is nothing more than the changing the shape, or having the lens of your eye round up or flatten out, depending on whether you're focusing close up or far away. And the other is going to be, that's first, there's one more, and that's pupillary constriction. And like I said, that's an autonomic response. in in response to bright light, without you doing it voluntarily, your pupil just constricts. Okay, that's the autonomic portion. Okay, so both motor, but one's voluntary motor and one's just an autonomic response. Questions about cranial nerve number 3? All right, now let's look at cranial nerve number 4. Cranial nerve number 4, like I said, is the only one that exits dorsally, and it kind of wraps around, and it is the trochlear cranial nerve. So it comes out from back here. Right. Wraps around, exits dorsally, wraps around to the front. So the origin, you can see it comes out a little bit lower than, so when it comes out, it's going to be a little bit lower than the third cranial nerve, where it arises out of the back of the brainstem. So the origin is in the midbrain, but it's at the level of the inferior colliculus. Okay, and the inferior colliculus is nothing more than the second lowest bump on the brain, back of the brainstem. It innervates just one muscle for cranial nerve number 4 that you have to worry about, and it's a muscle. It's an extraocular eye muscle known as superior oblique. Okay, your superior oblique eye muscle. We'll talk about exactly what that does on the next slide. But that's it for cranial nerve number 4. It's a relatively easy one. Okay. Moving on down, cranial nerve number 6. That's going to be your abducens. Okay, that's your abducens cranial nerve. And if you remember, for cranial nerve number 6, it's going to exit out of the pons, very medial. So here's cranial nerve number 6. So the origin is going to be medial pons. Okay, and just like the fourth cranial nerve, it only innervates one extraocular eye muscle. Anybody never heard of it? Okay. It innervates the abducens. I'm sorry, the lateral rectus. The abducens is the name of the nerve. It's the lateral rectus.
Let's go.
Abducens is cranial nerve number 6, and it innervates the lateral rectus eye muscle. Like I said, the next thing we draw, we're going to draw the eye muscles so you know where they are and what they do. Okay, so pretty easy for that one. Moving on down, we have here cranial nerve number 11, and that's going to be your spinal accessory nerve. Spinal accessory nerve. And when we talked about spinal accessory before, it's the only one that comes out of the spinal cord, and it arises from the ventral gray horn of C1 through C5, 4, 5, and then all those axons come together and exit the area of the medulla about here. Okay. so the origin, like I said, is ventral gray horn. C1 through C5. Does anybody know what it innervates? Trap and one more, SCM. Trap and SCM. Okay, here's trap and SCM. Okay, sternocleidomastoid. Trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. Okay, last cranial nerve number 12. The last motor one anyway, it is the end of the thing. So that's the hypoglossal nerve. Okay. When we looked at it a minute ago, we drew in our little pre-olivary sulcus, meaning the little sulcus that's just before the olive. And we saw that cranial nerve number 12 exited here in the pre-olivary sulcus. Okay, so the origin is going to be in the medulla, specifically in the pre-olivary sulcus. Okay, it has a pretty simple job to do. Just one thing. The function is to innervate tongue muscles. Okay, that's all. Those are the motor, purely motor cranial nerves. Okay, ocular motor, cranial nerve 3, trochlear 4. Interesting, 3, 4, and 6 are the only cranial nerves that innervate extraocular eye muscles. Cranial nerve 3 does most of them. 4, superior oblique, 6, lateral rectus. Spinal accessory, cranial nerve number 11, purely motor, SCM and trap, and hypoglossal tongue muscles. Question? Yeah, Jeff?
What you said the origin was of the cranial nerve 12?
It says medulla. It's specifically out of the pre-olivary sulcus. Okay, so that little sulcus that I drew, it's between, it separates the pyramids and the olives. It's like a little invagination between the bumps. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. Like I said, let's go ahead and draw some extraocular eye muscles here. Your motor, cranial nerves. Every time I look at this picture, I laugh because I remember one day I was walking down the hall with these slides or whatever, the pictures, the drawings, and I was walking by Dr. Eagler, and she's like, I don't want to tell you what that looks like. I never even thought about it before. Me, it's like, but she's like, oh, what are you teaching? Eye muscles. These are eyeballs, by the way. Only Eagler, believe me. Okay, so let's see. Right eye, left eye. Okay, that's what these are pupils looking right at you. To designate muscles, I'm going to just use a brown color. Feel free to use whatever you want. Let's talk about the extraocular eye muscles that are involved in raising the eyeball straight up. So if I ask you to just keep your nose pointed straight ahead and look up with your eyes, okay, that's what I'm going to indicate here. They live right here, okay, bilaterally. Okay, so all I'm doing is just drawing in the relative position of the extraocular eye muscles. Okay, and this is going to be the extraocular eye muscle that is involved in bringing the eye straight up, and that's going to be your superior rectus. It's on top, raises your eyes up, rectus. And there's one on both sides. These are my red. Okay, your superior rectus. Okay, well, if you have a superior rectus, it's involved in bringing your eyes straight up. There must be an inferior rectus that brings your eyes straight down, and that's going to be right here. Okay, so you have inferior rectus. Bilaterally. I'm not going to wait for there. Okay. And there's an eye muscle that's responsible for bringing your eyes straight out to the side. That's going to be your lateral rectus. Does anybody remember which cranial nerve innervated lateral rectus? Yeah, abducens. Put that over here. Okay, and then there's one more that has a straight plane of motion. It's involved in bringing your eyeballs straight in. You're going to look at your nose. That's going to be your medial rectus. Pretty easy so far. Then we have one that we talked about a little bit. It's going to be involved in, I'm going to indicate it this way because it's going to be involved in bringing your eyes down and in. Bilaterally. It's like if you were going down the stairwell and you had to look down to see where the next step is, that muscle's bringing your eyes down and in so you can see that. And that's going to be your superior oblique. I'll indicate both. Those are your superior oblique muscles. Okay, and if you have a muscle that's responsible for bringing your eyes down and in, there must be one responsible for bringing your eyes up and out. And that's your inferior oblique. So it's just going to be positioned down here to counteract that motion. Okay, so your inferior oblique muscles. And that's it. Those are your extraocular eye muscles. Superior, inferior, lateral, medial, rectus, and superior oblique, down and in, inferior oblique, up and in. And like I said previously, the majority of these muscles are innervated by cranial nerve number 3, your ocular motor. To remember which ones are not and which ones are different, I have a simple chemical formula for all you budding chemists out there, I know. So it's going to be LR6SO4. Okay, LR6SO4, And then all the others are cranial nerve number 3. Okay? LR6 stands for lateral rectus, which is cranial nerve number 6. And SO4 stands for superior oblique, that is innervated by cranial nerve number 4, or the trochlear. Okay, so if you can remember LR6, SO4, that's all you need to know. Okay, the others are all innervated by cranial nerve number 3. I've been told previously that this helped on a board question, just saying. Kind of a standard. Question?
Wait, can you run through that again with the
Mhm.
LR6?
Sure. LR6, which means is lateral rectus, which is cranial nerve number 6, which is abducens. Okay. SO4, superior oblique, innervated by cranial nerve number 4, which is trochlear. Okay. Those are the only two that aren't innervated by cranial nerve number 3. All the others are cranial nerve number 3. So really there's just two muscles, lateral rectus, superior oblique, are not innervated by cranial nerve number 3. Questions about that? Pretty easy so far. So I saved the mixed cranial nerves for the end. And then after that, we're just going to watch some videos on cranial nerve testing. You're not responsible for cranial nerve, for actually performing cranial nerve tests. You should know how to do the cranial nerve test, but not how to physically do them, okay, or what you're testing. For now, we're just going to take a 10-minute break and then regroup at 2 o'clock.